Yo, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I've known you for quite some time. Actually, I still remember the first time that you and I connected over the phone. I was still thinking of Dell Health, etc., and I've always admired your thoughts. So thank you so much for coming on. But before we get started, I always love to ask people to tell us a little bit more about yourself so that way the audience, I'm pretty sure most of them already know who Joe Kim is, but a quick briefing will be amazing.
Yes, no, first of all, thanks for asking me to be on here. It's an honor. And yeah, I don't even remember the first time I met you, but I feel like I've always known you. Anyway, so yeah, my background actually is a little bit interesting. Like most people our age, we never decided to go into clinical research. There was no courses, there was no majors. Now there's you can major in clinical research. But I graduated with a degree in molecular biology after not being able to cut it as a materials engineer. So early on, I was pivoting right away. My first career out of college was in social work. So I was working with disadvantaged children in their native environments, school, aftercare, homes, whatever. I taught high school science for a couple of years. And I just been pivoting the whole time until my first job in industry was in 1999 at Merck. When everything was on paper, I was a garden variety study manager doing all the things, everything from writing consents to writing data handling guidelines to typing up paper checks and mailing them to investigators. So I've been around for a long time, went through a bunch of different companies and ended my career at Lilly in 2022, where I was hired into innovation, moved into design hub, and finished up with digital health wearable sensor research, which was great. And now I work for ProofPilot. It's been just over 4 years as the chief strategy officer. And yeah, it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, I remember when we first did the jump from Lilly to Proof Pilot, and you're like, I'm not getting younger. Let me give it a try and see how it goes.
That
So
was a factor. Yeah.
I'm glad that it's working well on your side. One of the things that I try to bring into this podcast is I want to talk more about the industry, problems, issues that we're all looking to solve. Listen, so many of us are here because we are passionate about what we do. We're passionate about patients, caregivers, bringing drugs to market, etc. But I'd love your perspective on what are you seeing that some critical problems that we still ought to solve and we haven't solved, and some issues that maybe you're focusing on more than others might be.
Yeah, great question. And listen, I drank a lot of Kool-Aid all along the way, and a lot of people morph into an innovation role. Prior to joining Lilly, I was a director of clinical operations at Shire, which is now Takeda. I was recruited out of that execution job into an innovation job where there was no no ceiling on the budget. We could write checks. It was no problem. And what happens when people go into innovation or they get too far away from operating, they start to lose the plot of what we're doing. And coming to ProofPilot, I've realized I've come back to basics. It's like the Beatles, right? And after they go through Sgt. Pepper, they eventually come back to Let It Be and Abbey Road. And the basics are what it's all about. What do I mean by the basics? First of all, let's think about what clinical development organizations actually produce. We're not there to produce spa-like experiences for patients. We're not there to delight X, Y, and Z. We're there to deliver a data set that tells a story that a regulator will believe. Full stop. If it all doesn't ladder up to that, you're mucking around in the sand somewhere. You're chasing butterflies and daisies. Everything needs to be focused on delivering a data set that tells a story that regulators believe. And so what I think a lot of the industry has lost their way on is the brass tacks, the fundamentals, the blocking and tackling, whatever analogy you want to use, to make sure. And if you want to do that, if you want to deliver that data set, the best way to do it is to make sure everybody is conducting and participating exactly as intended. Because if you can't do that, you're not even doing science. It's not even science. It's mayhem. So forget about wearables, forget about AI. This is unpopular. Forget about patient experience for a moment. Okay, just hear me out. And first and foremost, you need to be able to enable, empower, and make sure that everyone can conduct and participate exactly as intended. That's what science is. there's a lot more in there. I know I said some provocative things that might seem unpopular at face value. That's the basic thing that we all need to get back to.
So how do we deliver without proper experience?
Yeah. I'll give you an example. With GPS, we now have unlocked millions of drivers who've never driven in a city, and we can get them from point A to point B rather easily. New York, Boston, London, Shanghai, whatever, name your city. With GPS, I can do it. I need to be a good enough driver. Okay. I don't need to be trained on how to read a stop sign or how to merge. If you can't do that, forget it. GPS isn't going to help you. But if you can be a good enough driver, real-time guidance can help you do that sort of thing. Now, the thing about GPS is GPS doesn't own the roads. They don't own the traffic lights. They don't own the landmarks, right? They're just guiding you through all that. And so even if you've never driven in New York City, you can be a great Uber driver because you're considerate and a skilled driver, right? So am I going to be able to pluck somebody from who's an art teacher and put him into clinical research? No. But can I get a good clinician who has run some semblance of research or understands that, train them on the basics like GCP, so on and so forth, and plop them into a protocol they've never run and have them run it smoothly? Yeah, I can. But not if I give them 5 manuals and 12 URLs and a bunch of email and when everything's scattered. And the Uber driver would fail too if I gave them a bunch of maps and write paper things. He or she would fail. But if you create content that helps them with that workflow in the way they want to receive it, yeah, I can go from Harlem to Brooklyn without making a wrong turn. And I can run visit 3 on a Wednesday at 11 o'clock without doing it incorrectly.
But then how do you keep patients in, right? Listen, compliance is everyone's nightmare, right?
Yeah.
Compliance or retention. It doesn't matter what type of study it is, doesn't matter how big or small. It's everyone's nightmare. And everybody's trying to scramble to figure out how do I do it? So even though you get the right investigator in, you give them all the right tools that they navigate, what can you do to keep the patients in, keep them compliant? And listen, everybody's talking about, hey, we get 100% compliance, 90% compliance. Where the truth is, I have no idea, to be honest with you, because everybody counts compliance different. But even from a retention perspective, it's the same problem. But still, I personally look at it as there's an experience in there that we're missing out on.
Yep.
And if we can't fix that experience some way, somehow, then we will never fix this. We're talking about issues today that were issues 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Stuff that's
Yeah.
solved for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Great observation. Yeah. So 2 things. First of all, we have to accept that the patient experience is driven and governed by the site experience. Much like a diner's experience is driven by the waiter's experience. If the waiter's having trouble placing the order, communicating the menu, generating the bill, the diner's going to have a terrible experience. There's no way around it. And to the extent that, and forget about DCTs, whatever, to the extent that still 90% of the patient experience is at the site, if the site can't operate smoothly, the patient's going to have a crappy experience and they're going to bounce. Not to mention, for the site, if they have a smooth experience, you can shrink that visit to its minimum time frame, right? You can make a 45-minute visit. But if there's triple checking and making mistakes and doing do-overs, that becomes a 90-minute visit, which is bad for the site because it's less profitable. And it's bad for the patient because now I'm there for 90 minutes. Now, the other half of it is patients live their lives, they have their routines. Going into clinical research amounts to an extreme amount of behavior change, unprecedented, and their health is at stake, right? This isn't like starting a new diet. This is taking a mystery drug. The good news is behavior change is rather well understood, and it's underpinned by 3 pillars. Ask anyone who's got a PhD in behavior change, this is what they say. They say some version of this. If you want to change behavior, everything needs to ladder up to 3 things. One is autonomy. So the person needs some semblance of control, right? You just can't force them into something. Now, doesn't mean they just do whatever they want, but they need some level of autonomy. competency. You need to help somebody get some easy wins and slowly build that skill up so that they can be better and better at doing their thing. And the final thing is community. How do you help somebody feel like they're not alone? This is why having a gym buddy to go work out is always better than doing it yourself, because you've built a little community of two people. You depend on each other. You're not in it alone. Now, so listen, this is clinical research. So you can't just have patients do whatever they want because it's science. Now, can you give them a little bit of choice in terms of home health care or in health, or sending a sample in versus coming in, or right? So there's a little bit of DCT methods you can introduce, but not if it breaks the science. If it breaks the science, game over. So you can create a little autonomy there, flexibility in appointments, whatever. Autonomy. What can you give them to help that to make them successful at their commitment? Now, most people will give patients a bunch of papers and throw it in a tote bag and say, good luck. Oh, and download these 3 apps and write down these 4 phone numbers. That's not helping patients get good and competent at what they're doing. So what can you do to unify that experience, make it much easier for them to understand things, know where to go, sequence things, prepare for the visit, right? You need to help them be competent. The community thing is hard because you can't unblind patients. You can't say, go talk to John Smith. But here's where we really fail. No one wants to touch this with a 10-foot pole. We never tell them, hey, wouldn't it be great to know that you're the 52nd patient in this study? Wouldn't it be great to know that, hey, you're one of 12 patients in this clinic or 150 patients in this country? Or wouldn't it be great to just say, hey, we locked the study? Or, hey, here is your lay summary, right? There are things we can do to let them understand that they're not doing this by themselves, and you can tick that community box. So those are the 3 pillars that if you want behavior change, you got to hit them all. If you can't hit them all, if you refuse to hit them all, we're going to always have compliance issues.
What about community from a site perspective? Community where you've got a study, all the sites can communicate, talk about their own issues, challenges, what can we do better?
Yeah, first of all, they do all know each other to some degree because typically they've been at an investigative meeting, SCRS, people
True.
talk. There's a little bit of danger again because it's a science. The thing you don't want to do is have, if you and I are at different sites, what I can't say is, hey, you should do it this way. And you're like, oh, that sounds good. And it's actually the wrong way. So there's a way to do that. And I'm not saying firewalls between every site, but we have to be careful about letting it become too fluid because we don't want the wrong information getting out. Now, that doesn't mean we muzzle everybody. We just have to put the right controls in place. So absolutely, sites too deserve to be in a community. And this is why SOS and SCRS and patients for sites as partners, all these conferences have come up because there is a need for people to be part of that community.
Vet it out. You go on Facebook, you go on other social media like
It's happening anyway.
Reddit. People are frustrated. They're talking about their issues, and sometimes they probably say a little bit too much than they should. But I just look at there's got to be a better way.
Yeah.
Talk to me about innovation. You lived in the heart of innovation for a while, right? Now, when we look at some of the pharma companies, innovations doesn't exist, or maybe it exists at a different level that honestly we don't really see. But from my view, it seems like most of them are gone. But I'd love to get your thoughts. What does innovation mean to you? What do you feel has been probably the most innovative thing that you've seen maybe in the last 10, 20 years?
Yeah, innovation is in some way, and listen, I had a job with that title. Having said that, I've been innovating since I started. And for me, it starts with, this is boring. Why don't I do it? This is a boring grind. What can I do to make this easier and faster? So I like to call it lazy smart. If I'm too lazy to do this repeated thing, I'm going to find a better way to do it. So I was doing it like year 1 into my role as a study manager. And the innovation I came up with by myself was like, I'm tired of writing the same query over and over again back to the site. Hey, your med history doesn't match your AEs. And so I created a simple matrix of languages, not like topics. And so when AE didn't match med history, I could cut and paste a boilerplate, put it into my form, and then just swap out the visits and AEs, right? I was able to fly through my queries. So I was doing that a year into my job. And then finally, I'm all the way at Lilly and we have gobs of money doing whatever we want. The important thing about innovation is that if it doesn't take and scale and people don't adopt it and it actually doesn't help them, You're just daydreaming. You're picking petals off the daisies and you're like, that's the easy part. It's so easy to just come up with a new way of doing things or dream about what if. But if you can't get not the early adopters, that's also easy. It's the early majority. If you can't get the early majority to say, oh, I like this, you're not innovating, you're daydreaming. And listen, it's fun to do that because we get so frustrated in the mundane grind. But that's where the work is. That's where the magic is, in the grind. And if you're too bored or you don't want to do it and you just like to be up here, that's great. We need some dreamers like that. But honestly, it just becomes what I like to say, inspiration porn. And it feels good when you go back on Monday and you actually haven't changed your own behavior. So that's not innovation. That's just daydreaming. And listen, we all need a dose of that, but that's not innovation. Innovation is like actually being able to implement it into the company, which I was able to do at Lilly. Right now, they have their own trial finder called Lilly Trials. That came from my group, for example. Before that, they never had one. Before I was at Lilly, they never did real patient videos to storytell about participation in research. So I did some really good things there. There's a lot of things I wasn't able to pull off there because the industry wasn't ready, right? And now finally Transcelerate has come up with, everyone's locked arms on, yes, here's a responsible way to give data back to patients, but no one's done it at scale. So right now it's still daydreaming. Once it starts to take, it's going to be innovation. So that's what innovation is to me.
What if at Lilly, you guys were able to do something where there were some investigators that were doing a really good job giving patients the data back? Or am I thinking of the wrong thing?
No, you're probably thinking of Pfizer. So Pfizer's been giving data back in a clunky way, but hats off to them. David Leventhal, who was retired from Pfizer, he was spearheading all that. It became his life's work and his legacy. And frankly, I'm jealous that he was able to pull it off. Early on, it was like a blue button version, which is clunky, right? It's a CSV file, but whatever, at least they did it.
At least they got it.
Yeah. And so you can't let perfect be the enemy of decent, at least. I don't know what it looks like now. I'm not privy to that, but I was on work streams with David and folks from Janssen and all over to try and scale this across companies. But Pfizer was the only one to do it at scale.
So does that mean patients own the data or sponsors own the data?
I think that's a little bit of a philosophical question. I won't answer that, but here's what I'll say. Let's say I'm on clinical research and I take a drug and it works, right? It fixes my IBD. And then I'm off of it because the study ends. And so I'm back to standard of care, which isn't helping me. So I'm hurting, but I was well on the study drug. The drug ends up coming out, but because no one gave me my data, I don't even know what to ask for, right? So I'm going to be in the dark until somebody decides to prescribe me this new drug that I already took that helped me. So that's not good. I challenge anyone to tell me that's good. That's bad. Let's take the reverse. Let's say I take a drug and it actually makes my IBD worse, right? So I'm getting hurt and I discontinue because of AEs. Let's say it's an SAE. Nobody gives my data back. But listen, it helped a lot of people, so the drug gets approved and I get it. And then I get prescribed that same drug I was taking that actually hurt me. And then it hurts me again, right? In both cases, I think, makes good medical ethics for me to understand at least what I took and how I did on it. So I can tell my doctor, hey, don't ever prescribe this to me. Or, hey, guess what? When this thing comes out, you're going to really help me. I challenge anybody to tell me that's a bad thing.
Yeah, the question of who owns the data is one that I feel like we've been fighting about for years. And I don't know, it can swing your way.
I think it's a bit of a distraction because you're going to get into a philosophical mire of arguments versus that practical application of giving data back and what it means to a patient to have it. No one can argue against that. I win that argument every time.
Yeah, you think about it, patients come into clinical trials. A lot of them, they do it just so that way other patients don't have to deal with it, right? So you think about it, the least that we can do, give them their data. Who owns it? Who cares, right? Yes, the sponsor pays for it. I know some sites are fighting to say, nope, this is our data, right? So where it lands, honestly, we don't care because at the end of the day, we're doing it for the patient. We're doing it where you and I can be patients, or we might have been in other clinical trials for one reason or another, right? But yeah, honestly, it's a question that kind of boggles my mind. And I appreciate your answer of I'm not going to answer that because I think I'm going to use that next time.
Because it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter who owns it. The fact is I should still get this, at least this part of data back, because without it, you're hurting it.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. If you were to design your own study, how would you design your own study?
First, listen, remember, clinical research is about testing the safety and efficacy of drugs. Now, remember what I said at the top, like patient centricity in quotes. We're not here to develop a delightful patient experience. We're not here to create a spa experience for the patient. Those are for spas. Now, I'm not saying let's just be rude and do whatever we want. And is it also true that if we can make it fit into their lives, they're going to be more compliant? Absolutely. But priority one is, will this help test the safety and efficacy of the drug? Because if it's not, what do we do? Why even do it? So the order of operations is, what do we only need to test safety and efficacy? So let's not be too greedy. And to what extent can we create visits or activities, let's call them, in the right sequence that makes sense for the patient also, without breaking the science? Now, you can't do that in an echo chamber. You can't do that in an ivory tower. You can only do that with discussing and collaborating, co-creating with sites and patients. So yes, you have to start engaging with them first. But again, not, gee, would you like a bathrobe? Let's get out of the fluffy stuff and really understand a day in a life, a week in the life, a month in the life, understand that the patient journey, and make sure that if we're going to make them change behavior, because we are, that we help them manage that with those three things: autonomy, competency, community. And as long as we keep those three things in our side view mirror, right? Keep the science in our windshield, keep the site experience in the other side view mirror, we can absolutely create science, clinical research that's going to work for the patient. And then secondly, the recruitment of those patients. Listen, this is frustrating me to no end. Again, we make birdhouses, right? Clinical development makes birdhouses. And what I mean by that is a data set that tells a story that regulators believe. So that's our birdhouse. Anybody who's making a birdhouse should know exactly what goes into that cost of the birdhouse. Clinical development teams don't often know what it costs to recruit a patient. They don't. Ask them and they're going to be like, they're going to get 100 different answers. What goes into the fixed costs to recruit a patient? So assuming patients come from the site, one could reasonably argue all the fixed costs and variable costs to open and close a site, you can attribute to your patient recruitment cost, your benchmark. So let's say it comes down to 100 grand to open and close a site no matter what. You do the math. 10 patients is at $10,000 per patient cost, and so on and so forth. And if we don't understand that really well, we're never going to be able to augment that with an advertising campaign or some other sort of central initiative. And we're never going to know, is this worth it? Should I actually open 2 more sites or spend that money this way? Because you need the benchmark to say, what am I paying now? I'm already paying $10,000 per patient randomized. I can tolerate 10,000, so on and so forth, because that's what I'm doing. Should I tolerate 50? Probably not. Maybe that's where I should open more sites. So there's a real cost accounting mindset that is lost in clinical research. But again, if we're making birdhouses, data sets, we absolutely need to be way more sophisticated about the management and cost accounting of what goes into that to deliver that data set. Now, having said that, do I think you should always have a website and always do a little bit of digital outreach? Yeah, like why wouldn't you do that? That's a very low cost thing, and you should always have a digital presence. Why would you talk about a groundbreaking therapy, research therapy, and not have a website? What, are you gonna have a black and white trifold handout? That's really janky. Right? These are world-class organizations and need to have a good sort of digital presence. This is the modern day.
How much does diversity change that or affect that pricing model or the sites that you choose?
Yeah, great question. First of all, we can't just shoehorn diversity into everything. First and foremost, again, this is a medical thing. Data set tells a story, blah, blah, blah. That data set has to ladder back up to the indication, right? So let's say it's breast cancer. I don't need 50% men. That's silly. That doesn't reflect the disease, right? Whereas lupus, there's a high proportion of African Americans and they're underrepresented. So we need to always follow the science and not just throw in diversity just because. I know that might sound unpopular, but first and foremost, it's the science. And all the breast cancer one's great, or prostate cancer, right? Should I enroll 50%? No, let's follow the disease. We've made some boneheaded sort of errors in not doing that, whether it's HIV or lupus or Alzheimer's, right? That actually disproportionately affects people of color. And we do a terrible job as an industry recruiting that population. So follow the disease. This is something Del Smith and I agree violently on really well. And if we do that, then you're bulletproof, right? No one can politicize this idea of diversity if you're following it for science.
Love it. Joe, I want to be mindful of your time. There's a question that I always ask at the end of the podcast. And the question is, not knowing who would come in next after you, what is the one question that you would ask them? And from the last podcast, the question to you was, what is the one thing that you wake up every morning thinking about?
Wow. Every morning I think about how to center myself for the day. And it's usually, will I work out and how and to what degree? Will I, when I, and then planning my first meal of the day. If your body's not feeling good, your mind's not going to do well. And it just cascades from there. So for me, it's about health and fitness first. That's what I wake up for. Now, I don't want to go to the gym and work out. I don't. I hate it. I hate it. But if you make these healthy habits, it pays off.
Yeah.
What would I ask the next person? Have you ever been at a breaking point where you just said, I'm done with this industry?
I love it. It's honestly, the questions have been interesting and all the conversation have been interesting in so many different ways, and I've learned a lot. But thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Have a great day.
Thank you.